Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Matt Kasman, who will discuss educational systems and agent-based modeling. Dr. Kasman is the Assistant Research Director at the Brookings Institution Center on Social Dynamics and Policy. So please welcome me join me in welcoming Dr. Kasman.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. I'm very glad to be here today. I'm going to be giving a brief talk on using systems science to explore links between education and health. Before I begin, I want to note that my comments today are my own and not those of the Brookings Institution as a whole, and are not affected by any conflicts of interest. Trying to advance slides. There we go. As other speakers at this workshop have noted and expounded upon in different ways, health outcomes, including obesity, can be usefully studied using a systems perspective. There have been a number of high-quality efforts in recent years to identify and characterize systems, elements, and dynamics that drive health outcomes. So on this slide here, I highlight two ambitious and prominent examples that situate obesity as part of broader systems of social life. The first, on the lower left, is a visual representation of the four-site obesity systems map. I think a lot of people here have seen this. It depicts the web of interconnected causal factors that affect the prevalence of obesity in a population. The second, on the lower right, is from a 2019 Lancet Commission on Obesity report on the global syndemic of obesity, undernutrition, and climate change. This figure describes how influences at multiple levels and scales link these health and ecological outcomes. Today, I would like to narrow in on one specific part of this broader system, or these broader systems, connections between education and health. I believe that these connections can be usefully placed into three broad categories. The first are direct relationships. This category includes the ways in which school environments and interactions that occur in the school setting can impact student health directly. So examples of these include access within schools to healthy meals and appropriate and enjoyable physical activity options. The second category are indirect links. This consists of the ways in which educational outcomes are related to later health outcomes. For example, college attendance and completion can influence later employment, place of residence, and social connections. As other speakers have noted, each of these may have important health implications. The final category are ways in which health can affect educational outcomes. As others have discussed during the workshop, feedback loops are an important consideration in system science. Relationships in this final category are an example of potential feedback mechanisms. At present, I think they're understudied, but might be incredibly important in determining health outcomes, particularly in an intergenerational context. I believe that connections between health and education can be productively explored using system science research tools overall. And I'm going to say a little bit about what this research might look like across each of these three distinct categories. So systems of science approaches to health have become more common over the past decade or two, and many of these focus on or incorporate direct educational influences. A recent example of system science research helping to illuminate direct connections between educational settings and health can be found in the Compact Project, which I've had the enjoyable opportunity to be part of for the past few years. One of the key insights of this project are the ways in which community members from a number of settings, including educational ones, can work together to affect meaningful changes that result in substantial and sustainable child obesity prevention within their communities. A full description of the multiple mutually supporting research approaches utilized during the Compact Project is beyond the scope of my presentation here, but I do want to draw attention to this work because I think it's an exemplar of its type that can both be extended in multiple ways and emulated elsewhere to look at other sorts of outcomes and programs and policies. There is a strong and consistent body of evidence that shows that whether and where someone attends college can affect a number of later life outcomes, including health. Unfortunately, there's a great deal of uncertainty about how policies and programs can make access to higher education more equitable and reduce persistent gaps in attendance overall, as well as at selective institutions by race and socioeconomic status. I've had the opportunity to be involved with a Multiphase Research Project to create an agent-based model of college enrollment that has begun to ask and answer such research questions. Although systems science is often well suited for disentangling the myriad determinants of educational outcomes, this example is actually one of only a relatively small number of research projects that utilize systems science to explore these questions. There's thus quite a bit of opportunity to expand not only on this project, but to engage in similar endeavors that explore other educational outcomes and treatments. There is burgeoning interest in high-quality research that demonstrates the presence of causal connections between health and educational outcomes. The example to the right, linking lead exposure to educational achievement, is from just a couple of months ago. To the best of my knowledge, there is no research that applies systems science to this area at all. Because of the clear linkages between health and education, causal mechanisms that operate in the opposite direction may represent important feedback loops that operate over long timescales, such as across generations, and could potentially be critical points of intervention to increase overall population health outcomes and reduce disparities. Thus, I suggest that researchers consider ways in which they can use systems science approaches to understand the dynamics that drive observed causal relationships and how these may be impacted by changes in policies and practices. In general, I believe that systems science researchers are at a moment in which we have a wealth of opportunity to answer questions that matter with increasingly sophisticated tools and rich sources of data. In order to do so, I think there's three critical next steps. The first is to advocate for and utilize appropriate, high-quality systems science approaches to education and public health connections. This will help build an audience that is aware of and familiar with such work. The second is to use formal and informal means of building capacity to engage in this sort of research. This might include developing courses or study programs, as well as active mentorship and guidance on the part of senior researchers. Third, perhaps more than any other research method, systems science benefits from broad input and expertise, as other people have highlighted today, in order to better understand and positively act upon links between education and health. I think that we need a strong community that includes systems science modelers, researchers, policymakers, intervention experts, and practitioners from a broad variety of experiences and settings. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to an interesting discussion with our panel and audience.